Welcome to the Impact Learning Visionaries podcast, where we celebrate the unsung heroes of the learning and development industry. As always, we'll be bringing some laughter and a bit of fun along the way, but more importantly, you'll get some incredible insights, key lessons, and unique perspectives on everything related and possibly unrelated to training and development. Let's get this show on the road. Right. Hello everybody, and welcome to the Impact Learning Visionaries podcast. Today we have with us Dr. Lynda Folan. She is one of the world's leading experts in organizational resilience, with over 30 years of experience in successfully delivering cultural, strategic, and transformational change in organizations across the globe. Lynda is also the force behind Inspired Development Solutions, where she leads a team in providing progressive and bespoke solutions that support their clients to achieve excellence. She's a regular contributor to opinion pieces where she provides valuable insight into a range of topics, from leading in a VUCA world, the needs of leadership in 2022 and beyond, and the importance of resilience as a game changer for business. And just to top that all off, she is also the exceptional author of the book Leader Resilience, The New Frontier of Leadership. Welcome, Lynda, to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. So the idea behind this podcast is really actually it's your story. It's all about you. So let me just dive right in and ask you just to tell us a bit about your journey and you know how you became the expert on resilience and all the other amazing things that you're an expert on. I mean, tell us that story.
So I guess I really started out with, like most 17, 18-year-olds, not having a clue what I wanted to do. So I decided at uni to do a triple major because I couldn't work out what I wanted to do. So I did economics, marketing, and psychology, and fell in love with psychology almost instantly. And from there on out, really, I was more interested in the organizational psychology early on. At that stage, we called it industrial psychology. But I was much more interested in how do organizations get more functional. So really my first degree, while it was quite broad, I started to narrow my thought processes in terms of what I was interested in. So I was just super lucky. I kind of fell into what I actually love doing and I'm really passionate about. And then I just continued to grow that journey. And I've kind of moved around the world a fair amount. So I've lived in 4 different countries on 3 different continents. And each time I've moved country, I've had to kind of upgrade my studies and my qualifications to meet the needs of the local area, or got coerced in the last one into doing a PhD that I wasn't really intending doing, but always been interested and passionate about how do you make organizations and people more effective, and how do people actually learn to thrive in what is quite a challenging environment that we're living and working in at the moment. So my PhD was really more an interest in that as a topic. How do we help people in organizations? We see so many people damaged in organizations. How do we change that around and actually help people to thrive in organizations rather than to end up on the wrong end of an organization and get damaged by it? So that was really the driving force behind kicking off those studies. And I've worked in that field my whole career. So right from my very first job was in human resources, and then just kind of moved through through some great brands. So I was lucky enough to work for the Hard Rock Cafe, great brand to work for, Tesco, some really big great brands. I was lucky enough to be with Tesco through the great transition when the organization was really transitioning. So I've had some great opportunities to see how organizations can transform. And now I do that really all the time in my job.
That's brilliant. It's such a fascinating area. And You used a word I haven't really heard many people use when they're referencing employees and organizations, and that's the term you used was damaged, which I found quite a fascinating word. And maybe, I mean, from your perspective, when you've worked with organizations, I mean, how does that show up in these organizations? I mean, and I'm really curious, like, why that particular word?
Yeah, we talk about culture a lot and organizational culture and the importance of organizational culture. And, we spend a lot of time helping organizations to get better at the culture. But when you've got a toxic culture, what you have is an environment in which people are getting damaged on a daily basis. And what we're seeing at the moment is that there's a significant level of that where we've got any form of toxicity in an organization. Even in a small team, you can see people really damaged, and we're seeing a really big increase in mental health issues related to pressure, stress, however you want to describe it. So, a lot of organizations are under significant level of pressure at the moment. And so stress levels are rising, mental health issues are rising. The UK is predicting a 40% increase in mental health, people seeking mental health assistance in the next 5 years. That's huge. That's astronomical. And that's not just from work, but that's from life and the whole experience of life. But if we can create safer, healthier organizations, then we can support people when they do have mental health issues and actually help to bolster them and support them to be better in those spaces. So yes, it is damage that we do see.
And in terms of these organizations, I mean, you talked about culture and specifically toxic cultures, but what do you see as the biggest kind of root causes to what I suppose you've described as a bit of a systemic issue in our organizations today?
Mm. So we know that about 50 to 70% of the variance in culture comes from leadership. So a lot of the times we're putting people into leadership roles, especially in the last couple of years, as we've had a deficit in leadership, and there's been people moving into leadership well before they were ready or given the tools to do leadership roles. And so what we've seen over the last while is people stepping into leadership roles and really battling and then fumbling, getting themselves into trouble, then actually damaging the culture. We also have seen in the last, so there's a book called The Narcissistic Epidemic. We are seeing a rise in narcissism across the globe. We can all put some reasons behind that, but reality is that we do still have a lot of dysfunction in organizations, a lot of racism, a lot of sexism, a lot of dysfunctions that we still haven't nutted out, even after all these years of working at it. And, certainly when I go in and do big reviews in organizations, I'm never surprised, but I'm still shocked at some of the things that we see.
Yeah, I feel I completely relate to that, and I feel what's missing is a global organization called Leaders Anonymous, where people can go, "Hi, my name's Jason, and I was an ineffective leader. Hello, Jason." Because it's
Yeah,
true.
I agree.
I think we've all been there. I remember early in my career being thrust into a leadership role, and there were parts of it that I was absolutely brilliant at, but there were an equal number of parts where I was absolutely spectacular and completely
Yeah.
inequipped to deal with. Yeah.
And unfortunately, you can't blame the leaders totally. Yes, they have a big impact on the variance in culture. But reality is that if we're not giving them the tools and the capability, then we're not actually solving the issue. We're just throwing people at it. And what we found with the research that I did, we discovered that actually if a leader's resilience drops, their ability to lead drops with it. So if you think about the last 3, 4 years even, people's resilience has dropped dramatically. We've seen real escalations in mental health and drops in resilience correlated together. And with that, what we've had is a drop in leadership. And so that's affecting organizations' health and well-being. And we really need to start to think about how do we develop that resilience on an ongoing basis in our leaders. Because if they can't lead themselves, then they can't lead other people. And you're fighting a losing battle.
Absolutely. And before we get onto the subject of resilience, because I do want to do a deep dive into resilience and just exactly how we help people essentially kind of trained for resilience. But before we get there, how much of this leadership crisis, and because it seems like a domino effect, is that you know, poor, like low resilience is leading to kind of poor leadership, and poor leadership is then reinforcing. It's like a typical kind of systemic reinforcing feedback loop. But how much of this do you think is being driven by this systemic failure of leadership globally? I mean, you just have to look at the world leaders to see terrible role models at play.
Yeah.
And how much of this do you think is a systemic kind of top-down issue?
Yeah, I definitely think there's a societal aspect to it. We have become a me society, and we see that in our global leaders. They very much, we seem to see a much more, I want what I want, and I don't care what anyone else wants. So we're definitely seeing mirrored in the social arena leadership that's not helping us to build leaders. So when I talk to my 18-year-old about leadership in the global world, he looks at me and goes, there isn't any. So our young people are really disillusioned with the leadership they're seeing. And so what role models are they going to use to actually map their leadership? So we've really got to work harder, I think, to counteract that leadership role modeling that people are seeing in the global footprint.
So your hypothesis is that resilience plays quite a significant role in helping to kind of I suppose almost remedy this kind of leadership crisis. So as a leader myself and many other leaders out there in the world, what in a kind of, like, if you were explaining it to a 5-year-old, and my wife sometimes would say that I behave like a 5-year-old. So how would you explain this concept of resilience to me?
Yeah, so for years we've talked about resilience in a range of different arenas, but in the organizational setting, it's still a relatively new area of research. We've got lots of stuff in the clinical domain, but you've got to be really careful to translate from clinical into organizational, because they're two different environments. So there's a lot of new research come out, and so what we did was a deep dive into the research that's out there to say, well, what is resilience in an organizational setting? And we developed a model of resilience which gives us clarity around what the dimensions are that you need to develop to grow your resilience. And so there are 3 key dimensions, and they're very psyche terms, but they're actually very simple in action. So the first one is locus of control. You've got to actually take back responsibility for your own actions. The minute you're in victim mode and going, woe is me, it's China or it's whoever's to blame, your resilience drops dramatically. And so that's the starting point. The second one is you've got to have good self-concept well-being, which in colloquial terms is emotional intelligence. So you've got to have strong levels of emotional intelligence. We know that leaders need emotional intelligence anyway. There's a lot of research basis for that. Their IQ has less play in their effectiveness as a leader than EQ. So we know that that's an important aspect. And the third one, and the highest correlation with resilience and with leadership capability, is constructive thinking, which is the ability to manage this piece of equipment that sits on top of our shoulders. Until we can help people to manage their minds, we really aren't making inroads into real effectiveness. Because if you think about any form of discrimination, comes from how you process the world. It's how you see other people. So unless we can change people's mindsets and shift their mental processing and what we describe as rewire their brains, then we really are battling an uphill battle with leaders. So those are the three key elements that we are developing with people and helping them. We help them to rewire their brains, we help them to build their emotional intelligence and to own their own outcomes. Those are the three areas that we work on. And that helps them not only with their own resilience personally and professionally, but it also enables leadership. And you can see why. They're all correlated with leadership capability.
And is there one of those that's maybe more foundational than the others, which is, if you can sort that out, it kind of creates a stronger foundation for you to work on the other two pillars?
Yeah, so constructive thinking has the highest correlation with resilience. So if you can get this right, then your emotions are less likely to be triggered by negativity. So if we can manage our brains and rewire our brains and actually get constructive in our thinking, we then stop that churn into negative emotional reactions, unnecessary negative emotions. Obviously, there are necessary negative emotions. When you're sad, you need to be sad, yeah? But there's a lot of unnecessary emotions that we can stop by just shifting our thinking. So that's super new research as well. So Seymour Epstein, who's one of the major researchers there, his book was 2014. So a lot of that's still really new in its and in its infancy, but we're starting to see massive impact from that work. I find if I can work with people with their minds, I get a way quicker shift than with anything else.
Okay, and I guess because we haven't developed human cloning yet, you can't be everywhere at once. So for people out there who are, I suppose, kind of going on this journey for resilience and taking a little bit of a cue from your experience, and specifically looking at that mindset, is I guess there's two components to it. Is how can you have that self-awareness of when you're kind of dipping into that space of negativity, and then what would you do to kind of almost realign yourself towards that kind of positive way of thinking?
Yeah, so there's a range of strategies, and my guidance to people is you've got to find the strategy that works for you. So we work through a range of different strategies that we help people to try out and use, and then they need to find the one that works for them. So we do lots around mindfulness, lots around meditation, lots around journaling, lots around belief shifting. So we do some strategies, some really simple and effective strategies around belief shifting. We do a lot of work around just bringing your thinking into consciousness. We call it self-talk, so your self-chatter, and really actually helping people to bring that into consciousness. Because the minute it's conscious, then you can do something about it. While it's unconscious and just running, as for most of us, while it's just running, you're actually totally unconscious about its impact. And it could actually be interfering in your ability to use your logical processing because it's just running in the background unconsciously. So we teach people a range of skills, and then they need to go away and find the one that works for them. So martial arts is a great strategy for people. You talked earlier about skiing, snowboarding, anything where you're actually teaching your mind to shut off. So there's lots of strategies, physical exercise, swimming is often talked about. I even have people tell me that ironing does it for them. It doesn't do it for me, but the methodic ironing, gardening. So we encourage people to have a range of strategies that they're using. because learning to manage your mind is one of the most incredibly important things you can do to thrive in today's world.
Ironing is fascinating. I'm not sure it's going to catch on, but
No,
who
doesn't do
knows?
it for me. Definitely doesn't do it for me.
And in this whole coming back then from, like, with this foundation of positivity, mindfulness, resilience, the type of and you talked about cultures, but what's the correlation in your mind between resilience and culture? And maybe, there's also a recent, and it's not that recent, but I mean it's been quite popular for the last probably decade, is this idea of psychological safety, and knowing that it's probably harder to become resilient and address a lot of these things if you're in a culture that has very low psychological safety and is almost kind of working against you.
Yeah, and so what we're always talking about is it's a balance of me developing my resilience, but the organization providing the culture. We talk about psychological safety a lot, but that culture that supports me when maybe my resilience isn't so high. So you need both. I don't think organizations can abdicate responsibility. Oh, you go fix your resilience. It's your problem. I think we have to do it as a joint piece. So when we work in organizations, we build resilience from the bottom up and the top down. So we're working at all layers of the organization, and there's some really clear systemic aspects to organizations that make them more resilient, which then builds that capacity for psychological safety. And there is one chapter in my book that tackles organizational resilience, which is a whole separate entity. But reality is that we've got to be doing both. Got to be helping individuals to build resilience, because they're going to move on from our organization. They're also going to have personal issues that they're facing. So we want to build individual resilience, but we also want to build organizational safety. Health and safety in the workplace is hugely important at the moment. And I do think organizations are seeing, I think it was something like, I don't remember the exact percentages, but it was something like over 20% of people who left their organizations in the Great Resignation left because of culture, not because they wanted a new job. So huge numbers of people leaving toxic cultures. We're seeing people walk with those. And I also think that the younger generations are going to be less tolerant. The Gen Zs who are coming into our organizations are really way less tolerant. If they see bad behavior in an organization, they're going to walk. So we're going to have to, I think we're going to have to get better at it. I think you've got to do both, though. Got to build, I've got to look after my own resilience because no one else can look after it for me. But the organization's also got to have the right support structure for people.
And just as the audience is predominantly kind of people in the learning development kind of and even organizational psychology space, is if you were taking, like, looking at this concept of resilience, how, and you're putting yourself in the shoes of one of these people who are, let's kind of take a hypothetical situation. I'm a brand new learning and development manager at a large corporate. I've got to come in and essentially assess what the best approach is going to be to kind of make a difference or make an impact in my organization. And what I immediately kind of observe is one of the foundational things is, like a lot of larger I suppose corporates, is there's often pockets of different cultures in those organizations, and I just happen to find myself in a pocket of one that's maybe showing a lot of these signs and symptoms. Like there's a lot of negative thinking, there's a bit of a blame culture, there's a bit of a toxicity in the environment. What would be the like the one key piece of advice that you would give to that person who is trying to navigate that situation and scenario and thinking like, where can I make the biggest impact straight? Like, where do I start?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. Look, I've spent my time in corporates as well, so when you're that lone voice in quite a toxic environment, it can be challenging because you're trying to bring about change. I think the thing that I learned over the years is you've got to speak up. You've got to get in the ears of the senior people and speak up about it and start to shift it from that perspective. You've got to influence them to understand the impact that that's having on the organization's outcomes. So there's a lot of stats out there now around the impact of toxic cultures on outcomes. There's a lot of stuff you can do. I would kick off with a culture survey as a starting point. If you can get that over the line, then you've got some data to go, look, we've got a problem in this pocket. It's fine over here, but in this pocket, it's not okay. So culture surveys aren't the be-all and end-all, but they at least give you some data. A lot of business people want data, they want numbers to tell them it's right or wrong. So a really good culture survey like the Human Synergistics OCI or any of the culture surveys that are really measuring culture are a really super great starting point for an L&D person. Rather than trying to train people in that culture, actually get some data that you can say, actually, we've got a problem here. And these are the aspects of the problem. Then you can develop an OD plan from that and start to actually influence the organization to say, this is how our people feel. Do we want them feeling like that or not? So data does help in big corporates. And even when I go in, if I can see there's a hesitancy from senior leaders, I'll suggest first off we do a culture survey, because let's not change anything unless there's something that needs to be changed. So I would leverage a decent culture survey as a starting point for most organisational change, particularly if you've got leaders who maybe are sitting on the fence, you don't know whether they'll come on the journey. If you want to bring about change, that's a really great starting place. But it's tough when you're potentially a lone voice and you don't have senior leadership buy-in. That's where you've got to go. You've got to go to get that senior leadership buy-in.
Brilliant. And I often ask people what they want to be when they grow up, in all ages. But I guess I'm going to shift the question slightly. Is you've had 30 years of kind of building up this wealth of experience and knowledge and wisdom. What is your aspirational goal? I mean, what is the one thing that kind of when you go into retirement and you start to become a skydiving skier, like basically falling off the sides of mountains on two pieces of wood? What would you like to say? At least I've banked and achieved that, or at least started on that journey, or started the world on that journey of change.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because obviously I never really had an aspiration to do a PhD, but oopsed into it kind of out of interest. But I've always had a life plan. So I'm one of these people who knows exactly where I want to be in the next 5 years. And I guess the biggest thing I want to do is be able to impart the knowledge that I've gained. And that's why when my mentor suggested to me that I turn my PhD into a book, I went, absolutely not. I'm not doing another single piece of work. And then 6 months later, I was writing a book. I do think I have a few more books that I might want to pen to paper. I'm not a writer naturally, but there's a lot of stuff in my head that I can teach, but I can't get out to larger groups of people. So they might not be as complex and as research based as the last one, but there's definitely some stuff I'd like to put into some sort of documentation. And also I'm growing a group of leaders behind me who can take the work that I've started and continue it. So I'd just like to see that continue through my organisation. I have no aspirations that my son will ever want to be a psychologist. But I am growing some younger leaders behind me to take on that, that journey. And the passion that all of us in the organisation have around growing people. I do what I love every day, so I have no desire to do anything else in a work setting. But I do have a few bucket lists still on my list from a personal perspective, and not jumping out of an aeroplane to go skiing.
Well, that's fair enough. But if you can disclose the one that you are most hopeful that you'll be able to tick off that list, what would that be?
Oh, I am going to be ticking off one of the ones that's been on my list for a while. I'm going to visit the gorillas in Africa over Christmas. That's been on my bucket list. So I'm getting to go to 3 different parks to play with the gorillas. So super exciting.
Awesome.
Not quite as scary as jumping out of an aeroplane onto a ski slope, but certainly on my bucket list.
Fantastic.
And I travel a lot, so I've been to 110 countries. So I will continue to do that because that's just part of my passion.
Amazing. So I'm going to ask one final question, and that is for the benefit of the audience. If you could share a book or podcast that you have read or listened to recently that's really had a profound effect or impact on your way of thinking.
Yeah, I've become absolutely addicted to Andrew Huberman, who's a neuroscientist. He's a Stanford professor and a doctor of neuroscience and a couple of other things. The work that he and his researchers are doing is just phenomenal. All the stuff that we know from a psychological perspective, they are just bolting on the physiological perspective. So all the stuff we know about the importance of mindfulness and meditation, they're now showing the physiological aspects, the importance of sleep, the importance of resilience. So I'm fascinated with the work they're doing. Quite often it goes right over my head because it's way too techy, but it's really, really fascinating what they're doing in the neuroscience world. And Huberman, he runs the Huberman Lab, which is, they put out a lot of stuff. And it is, I think anyone can listen to it. You might not understand fully the complexity of it. I certainly don't. But it's just really interesting. So some of the research is just fascinating. So yes, I'm addicted.
Brilliant. That sounds amazing. I'm definitely going to go and check that out.
Yeah.
Right. Lynda, thank you very much for joining us today. And for those of you listening who want to go and read all about her fascinating book, just a reminder, it is called Leader Resilience, The New Frontier of Leadership. Dr. Lynda Folan, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Hey, thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Impact Learning Visionaries. If you found it interesting or helpful, please subscribe by clicking on the button down below so you don't miss our next one. Also, be sure to check out our Reality Bites blog for more information on how technology is aiding in learning development. Links are all in the description below. Go check it out. Thanks a lot. Bye.